Hello, I'm George Harvey, and this is Tom Finnell, and we are here for Energy Week for the time ending on the 21st of November 2013. I will introduce this by saying I go through about 300 news headlines every day doing news analysis on energy and global warming. And I use that to keep a blog and to write for Green Energy Times. There is actually a picture of the blog. And Tom, if you could put that up just for a second so people could see it. Okay, this is the blog, and the web address of this is Geo Harvey, just like you see it on the top there, .wordpress.com. And it is updated every day, and I think we can get off with that now if you'd like. Tom and I come together to present the most important news material for the previous week and to do a little comment on it. I want to start off today by saying we were expecting to have Leslie Sullivan-Sachs here talking about Vermont Yankee today, but she couldn't make it, unfortunately. She asked me to tell everybody that Safe and Green campaign is having a panel discussion on decommissioning Vermont Yankee on the 3rd of December, which is a Tuesday, from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. at SIT, which is on Black Mountain Road in Brattleboro. And they will be having Deb Katz, who many people know. Actually, many people know Leslie Sullivan-Sachs, too. Tom Buchanan and Dr. Marvin Resnikov from Nuclear Waste Management Associates. And they're going to be talking about the options and expectations on decommissioning from 3 different points of view. So you can go to Safe and Green Campaign, which is just as it sounds, safeandgreencampaign.org, to get more details on that. So going into the news of the week, we had some really interesting news this week. All I have to do is find it. Here it is. Starting on the 15th, which is a week ago, we have a number of items on that day. Iowa has 3,200 wind turbines in operation, producing 5.1 gigawatts of wind energy. And there is an expert. This is 25% of the state's electric needs are served by wind power. And there's an expert on Iowa wind power whose name, believe it or not, is Tom Wind. And he gave an interesting observation. He said that if they had the mandate to do it, they could get to 35% of the electric needs served by wind within 2 years. And this brings up a really interesting point, which is the point of solar and wind both being resources that can be tapped very, very fast. I had this really brought home to me last summer when I saw a offshore wind farm on the, and you know, I mean, offshore, you have to do everything from ships. It's not easy. And they were installing a wind farm off the coast of Wales, and they were putting in turbines at a rate of 1 every day. So this big wind farm that they had was going to be finished in 90 days with 90 wind turbines. This is pretty.
You don't think about stuff like that.
You don't think about it. And when you think about Siemens has got a new wind turbine that is 6 megawatts. You put in 100 of those.
One machine.
One machine, 6 megawatts. We're talking about this is not nuclear power, folks. This is not 20 years of building that plant.
Well, for reference, how many homes with 6 megawatts power?
Honestly, I don't know.
Off the top of my head, I'd say somewhere around 300. Maybe no more than that. Probably close to 1,000.
6 megawatts?
Yeah.
No, I don't think it would be that many. But I mean, you've got to remember that. All right, maybe what I should do right now is explain to people what the capacity factor is.
Yeah, that would make some sense.
Every kind of power that we've got is intermittent to some degree. People who are in favor of nuclear power, coal power, whatever, say you can't depend on wind and solar because they're intermittent. But the fact is, everything is intermittent. You have to take any kind of power plant down from time to time in order to service it. And the nuclear plants that we've got, depending upon the plant, will go down once every 18 months or once every 2 years. And they go down for a month so they can be refueled. And they go down often for a variety of reasons that have to do with maintenance. It happens that we've got 100 nuclear plants operating in the United States today. 10 of them are not operating. In fact, they're not on. They're technically capable of operating, but they are not actually producing power today. They're shut off for whatever reason. Most of those are shut off for refueling. Refueling is usually done in the fall and the spring because those are the seasons that have the lowest load. And when a nuclear plant is shut down, the power is brought in from elsewhere. We've got this power grid that can ship the power around. And the fact is that 20 years ago, the DOE said that the maximum distance that you can ship power cost effectively on the grid for high voltage DC is 4,000 miles. So, you know, we can bring in power, we can move power around the country as long as we've got the power lines. They are a problem for renewable power. We need better power lines than we've got, but not much better. And a lot of the needing new lines is not, hey, shut up. It might do that again. And I'm sorry that it has. I don't know how to run this thing. I know a lot of things about computers, but not how to make them be quiet. I used to write compilers and operating systems. You'd think that I'd know more about them. The capacity factor for nuclear in the United States is 90%, which means that the plants are in operation about 90% of the time. Elsewhere in the world, it ranges from 80 to 85%, which makes me worry a little bit that in the United States we're trying to push them too hard. I don't know enough to know whether that is in fact the case. For other types of power, there are other capacity factors, and the capacity factor of nuclear is the highest. Hydropower is subject to periods of low rainfall.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So its capacity factor is closer to 80%. The capacity factor for solar depends upon where you are, but it generally ranges between around 25 to 35%. Obviously, you don't get any solar power at night, and you don't get as much when you don't get as much power when the power is. I just got a note here saying
your power bill has to be paid.
No, it said I'd lost contact with the internet, but that's okay. I don't think I need it. The capacity, my computer's capacity factor is not 100%. The capacity factor of wind is a little higher than that of solar. But when you compare a megawatt of wind in a wind farm with a megawatt of nuclear, the wind is going to produce about a third, maybe 40%, maybe 45% of what the nuclear will. But it's not. It doesn't compare. You are comparing not quite apples and oranges. You're comparing big apples with small apples. And in a sense, there's another comparison that has to be made. The wind is variable depending upon the wind, and of course we don't have a lot of control over the wind. So nuclear, we have a little bit more control. It can go down unexpectedly, but nevertheless, a gigawatt of wind is probably, we could probably say that it's similar to 400 megawatts of nuclear. I'm not 100% sure on that. Nevertheless, the idea of a nuclear plant takes a long time to go online. You have a variety of concerns that just go way past what you do with other power sources. For one thing, you've got the Nuclear Regulatory Commission involved, and you know the process that you have to go through to get a nuclear plant online is very long. Anyway, getting back to this, what he's saying is that he believes that Tom Wind in Iowa believes that they can go from 25% of the state's electric needs to 35% in 2 years because they can install power so fast. There's at least one nuclear plant in the United States that started construction over 20 years ago and still is not complete, and in fact isn't even close.
Yeah, it takes forever.
It takes forever, yeah. And typically with nuclear, it takes longer than is projected and costs much more. Typically what happens with solar is that it takes less time than projected. And I think the same is true of wind. But the power can be brought in online, put online, very, very fast. If you're talking about run-of-river hydro, which is there are a bunch of hydro types that do not require dams. I can list 5 of them, and 2 of them at any rate could be used in Vermont. There's no dam. There's really, in the case of one of them, you could argue that there's no appreciable environmental cost to it at all.
Just dump it in the river.
Yeah, you just, you know, the Archimedes screw. We talked about that. They use them for moving fish fry around because they're so gentle. The Queen Elizabeth's 2 Archimedes screw turbines finally made it to being fully functional this week.
Good for the Queen.
Yeah. And she's got these 2 Archimedes screw turbines, they're huge. They're like, I've forgotten how big, but they're like 4 meters across each. They're Archimedes screws, just huge things.
It's just a great big spiral.
That's right.
Great big spiral cylinder.
That's right. And and she's got these 2 of them, which are powering in the Thames, which I had always thought of as a flat river, where they're at a weir. And a weir is kind of like a dam, except the water flows over it, and it's low enough that the fish can swim up the waterfall in much the same way that they swim upriver in rapids. So it really doesn't do much in terms of environmental problems. It's a weir that was originally put in 200 years ago as a point of a canal lock, so they could have river traffic farther up. And she just said, okay, let's do that. And they're powering Windsor Castle using those 2 Archimedes screw turbines. Okay, California is on its track to have 33% of its power from renewables in 2020, mostly building up wind and solar. Japan, unfortunately, and this was expected, had to slash its carbon emissions expectations because its nuclear power plants are down because of Fukushima, the Fukushima meltdowns. So people are unhappy about that, but it really, I don't know how they could have gone any other way. On the other hand, the good news from Japan, a year ago, the analysts were projecting that there would be a 250% growth in solar power in Japan this year. Just this year, 250%.
250%.
They were wrong. It was 350%.
Well,
as I said,
sometimes it pays to be wrong, huh?
solar power can be installed really fast. And one of the things that I saw recently, this is really kind of a hoot. They have an offshore solar farm. I'm not kidding. They built an offshore solar farm, which is a whole lot cheaper.
When you think about it, it does make sense.
It does, yeah. It makes perfect sense. And it just looks like a big barge dock, you know, and it's like, you see it from the air and it looks like I don't know, if they'd put it in a fish farm, it would have looked very similar. Okay, getting back to work here. There was an interesting article on the 15th in a publication called Eurasia Review. And the title of it, it's an opinion piece, Renewable Energy Can Pave the Path to Peace. And the note that I have is, one way or another, society has to pay the price of conflict over energy, more often than not perpetuating an endless cycle of poverty. Procuring energy does not need to be so brutal. And that is just true. And you know, I look at solar and I look at wind, and when I see the thousands, literally thousands of villages, it might be tens of thousands of villages in India. It was 2,000 villages in the state of Assam alone over a period of 2 years that got their first electricity from solar power that was off grid. It was village microgrids and rooftop, and people got their first light bulbs. They got their first electric fans, and they were very happy about that. And you know, when you think about it, what are the reasons for people to go to war? If you could eliminate three things, you'd probably eliminate most of the reasons why people would go to war. One of them is they need to have some comfort in their life, and that means they need to have clothing, a place to live, and food. Basically, basic needs taken care of, possibly, you know, some kind of medical attention available. But just basic needs. They need to have their basic physical needs met. The second thing that I would argue they need is hope. And when you can meet the basic needs for comfort, and this is at a level which is rather distant from what most people in the United States experience, or at least the ones who have homes. And when you can give people hope, you've gone a long ways. And the third thing, and people really need this, is respect. And when I said that to somebody, I think it might have been, I don't remember who it was. She said, respect and love. Well, you know, we can argue that that's probably true, but at a very minimum, they have to feel that they are respected. And if they have those three things, I think we'd go a long ways toward eliminating war. And if we could eliminate war, that would finance renewable energy.
Finance an awful lot of things.
Oh, the amount of waste that we have because of war is unbelievable. It is absolutely unbelievable. Anyway, going on. The decommissioned, this is on the 16th, the decommissioned Connecticut Yankee nuclear power plant won a court case and was awarded $126 million because it's storing the nuclear waste it created, which is the responsibility of the U.S. government. The government, of course, is not subsidizing nuclear power, it's just paying for waste storage and a few other things. Now, we're going to get back to this. We're going to get back to this because there was another court case, and those two court cases between them are a serious problem. All right, data from EnergyNet, the Danish grid operator, says that wind power produced 30% of gross power consumption. This is not all renewables, it's just wind. Okay, 30% of all power consumption so far in 2013. And during 90 hours of this year, it produced more than 100% of what the country needed, with a high peaking at 122%. They didn't say what they were doing with the excess power, but that's what they said. They are looking to see these figures grow. Now, in Denmark, renewable power does not mean just wind. They don't have a lot of solar up there. In fact, they've got very little of it. But Europe in general does a lot with biomass. Mm-hmm. And biomass, folks, does not mean smoke. Don't connect the two. They are not necessarily connected. All right, going on. On the 17th, the CEO of Exelon, Christopher Crane, has acknowledged that the Quad Cities and Clinton nuclear power plants are in trouble. And the financial trouble. And he said both plants could stay open if they could get long-term contracts at prices above market rates.
That makes sense.
Well, wouldn't we all like that? Yeah. Give me free money, and I'll stick around for you.
Aren't they doing something like that in Britain as we speak?
As we speak, double the going rate. Oh, and there was
For
another
20
one.
years.
For 35 years.
35 years.
And on top of that, there were a few little costs that were not quite revealed in this first thing. Maybe they didn't know. They didn't think about them. I suspect they knew, but it wasn't a direct cost. It was an indirect cost. The cost of hooking those 2 reactors up to the grid is $1.6 billion.
That's more than I spent last weekend.
I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. Okay. Anyway, the stuff folks in Gresham, Fairview, and Wood Village, Oregon, flush down their toilets and put down their drains is being harnessed to produce energy. And the cost is being applied to the sewer system, customers of the sewer system. 8 years ago, it cost $40,000 a month. I'm figuring that's the energy cost of the sewer system in those towns. And they are saying that by processing the waste differently, they're cutting their energy costs to 0.
Excellent. Aren't we doing something along those lines right here in Brattleboro?
We were once upon a time, but, sometimes things don't happen the way they're supposed to. Anyway, that was what it was. Yes, we still in Brattleboro are planning on paying money that we don't need to pay. But, it's nice to be charitable. On the 18th, we got the news that Senator Edward Markey, is that his name?
Yeah,
Ed Markey,
from
Massachusetts, has introduced the American Renewable Energy and Efficiency Act, which would require all electric utilities to get at least 25% of their electric supply from renewable sources by 2025. I think I would call this the Energy Salvation Act, because their intention, they have said in their last board meeting, I think it was to follow a 20-year plan of just gas, coal, and nuclear for the next 20 years. And if they have to get 25% of their electric supply by 2025, starting with 6% in 2015, it means they're going to have to change that business model, which personally I think is probably going to drive them to bankruptcy before 2020.
You mean their existing model?
Their existing model that depends upon nuclear and fossil fuels. I just don't see how they can survive. Anyway, going on. That's just my opinion. He did introduce the bill. That wasn't my opinion. Tokyo Electric Power Company has started removing nuclear fuel from a damaged reactor building at Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant for the first time. And this is considered an extremely dangerous process, but it has to be done. I think it's building 3, unit 3. I forget.
I'm not sure which one it is, but I've been reading about this.
Yeah.
This is very touch and go. This is extremely touchy stuff.
Yeah. And if you see a picture of the interior of the plant where the spent fuel pool is, it looks like they've got everything well under control, but it is regarded as an extremely touchy process. They have to remove all of that stuff. Unfortunately, the current condition of the building itself is questionable, and the fuel is stored 80 feet up in a. It's like kind of like having a huge swimming pool at the 8th story level in a building and having it full of.
We got one of them right here.
Where's that?
Down at Yankee.
Yes, we do. It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same, except for one thing. There's one difference, and that is the spent.
The building's not falling down.
Well, I'm sorry. There's 2 differences. One of which is that the building is not falling down, at least not that we know of at Vermont Yankee. But the other is that the Vermont Yankee spent fuel pool has as much fuel in it, spent fuel in it, as all of the reactors at Fukushima Daiichi.
Say that one again. That's a little scary.
If you take the spent fuel in all 6 of the reactor buildings at Fukushima Daiichi and combine what they have, it's less than what is in the spent fuel pool at Vermont Yankee.
Oh, that's encouraging.
My
Helps
understanding,
me sleep at night.
yeah, well, yeah, don't let it get you down. But the fact of the matter is, they've got something like 500%. At least that's what I'm told. They have something like 500% of the amount of fuel in that spent fuel pool that they were originally intending to put in there. Now, a lot of that was done by playing games with geometry and playing games with chemistry and playing games with other things in order to make it safer to put the fuel assemblies closer together. But even so, it would be nice to have that stuff out of there and into dry cask storage as soon as possible. And that's one of the things, in fact, that Leslie's thing on the 3rd of December is going to be addressing, is the business of the, and they can take that fuel out. They can't take it all out right away because the fuel has to stay in there for at least 7 years. Because when it comes out of the reactor, it's got a lot of short-term radioactive isotopes in it, so it's highly, highly, highly radioactive. And it produces a lot of heat just because of those isotopes, even though there's no fission going on. The radioactive isotopes that are not uranium and other fissionable materials undergo decay, and that produces a lot of heat. So they have to do something about that before they can put it into dry cask storage. Okay, getting on. Oh, this is fascinating. This one is fascinating. Rooftop solar panels. For the first time, somebody did a study on what direction to have them face.
I read that.
Isn't this beautiful? This needs some explanation. West-facing rooftop solar panels produce 49% more electricity during the peak demand period.
That's the key, right there.
That's the key. You got it. Compared with south-facing panels, according to a new study from Pecan Street Research Institute. The research was the first of its kind to evaluate orientation of PV panels.
You'd have thought.
Who'd have thought? Now, it's not going to do anybody any good using the net metering schemes that we've got today. It would do the power company some good to have west-facing panels, but it won't do the owners of the panels any good because the electricity from the panels is being sold at
a flat rate.
Flat rate. And I think people don't realize this, and this is something that we've mentioned before. The flat rate that people see on their electric bills does not reflect the actual market very well. The rate for power can go negative at night, and it has gone negative a bunch of times. In Germany, there were 10 instances, 20 instances this year, when I read about it a couple months ago, in which the rate of the wholesale power rate had gone to negative $100 per megawatt hour, which is 10 cents per kilowatt hour, negative.
Negative means they pay you to
take it away. If they're going to be producing power on these old plants that have to run at night, that's what's going to happen. Now, with wind power, if it's just wind power can be furled and unfurled in a matter of just a minute or two. But nuclear power, no, it has to go fast and hard all night. And it's like, you know, if the power has got to be kept on in order to have the boiler producing steam in the morning, so that it'll be producing power at the full rate during the daytime. And in fact, what has happened, I mentioned this last time, during peak demand load, the rooftop solar in southern Italy has brought the expensive peak demand power rate down to zero, because they're producing power from the sun at exactly the time that people most need it.
Exactly, yeah.
And, you know,
beautiful coincidence.
Isn't this a great coincidence? Of course, the flip side of that is, what do you do at night? And the interesting thing about that is, solar power it produces best in the summer in most places, and it produces clearly none at night, but best in the afternoon, early afternoon. Wind power produces best at night, and the season when it's best is during the winter. So they make a very, very nice match. But this thing of 49% more electricity makes me feel like maybe we should be thinking of net metering being in terms of the price of the power at the time it's produced. It would be fairer to the utilities, and it might make it possible for the customers who have net metering to make more money.
Well, another thing that's happening parallel to this is improvements in storage.
Oh, yeah.
And we haven't touched, we haven't really even scratched the surface there.
Well, for anybody who wants to know about storage, we've got storage. We've got lots of storage.
Well, the hydro dams.
Yeah. I mean,
Pump storage.
We've talked about going down to the pump storage place at Northfield Mountain.
Yeah.
And the idea of Northfield Mountain, which is a park where you can go cross-country skiing and picnicking and stuff like that, also, by the way, has a maximum power output, which is 160% of Vermont Yankee nuclear power plants. This is not trivial.
No, this is.
As a matter
and
of
I'm
fact,
sure it was done in thinking about the.
that's what they were doing.
Yeah,
they were saying we can buy power at night when it's cheap and sell it during the day when it's dear. And the Northfield Mountain facility would produce just about 100% of the power that's needed by the state of Vermont.
That's interesting. Really quickly, explain what pump storage is, in case anybody doesn't understand it.
About 20 miles downriver from the Vermont Yankee plant is Northfield Mountain. It's on the border of Northfield and Irving, Massachusetts. And they use a reservoir, which is the Connecticut River for about a 20 or 25 mile stretch. I'm not sure how far it is, but it's in that range below the Vernon Dam, which is where the Vermont Yankee plant is. And they take water out of that and they pump it to the top of a mountain where there's a reservoir. I don't remember the size of the reservoir, but it's more than 100 and less than 200 acres. And it's deep. There's a lot of water in there. And when they see that the price of power has gone low enough, this is the spot wholesale price of power, they turn those pumps on and they pump it up to the top of the hill. Now, the pumps are turbines, and they're reversible turbines.
Yep.
So they can use those same pumps to extract power when they run water down the hill. So the water that's up at the top of the hill that was put there during the night when the price of power was very low, they can use to produce power during the daytime when the price of power goes high. And the price of power can go high during the daytime. Now, what happens to the scheme when you start getting solar power involved, which is producing power at the very moment that you need it most, but also the very moment that Northfield Mountain would be making the most money? I don't know. My suspicion is that what it means is for those days when solar power can cover you and cover your demand load, we can do that. For those days when the sun isn't shining brightly and the production is low, we can get the power from a place like the Northfield Mountain plant. But it's an interesting contrast, and it's one I would love to just get in a car. We should get a camera, get in a car, drive down the road, stop for a moment at Vermont Yankee, ask them if they'll show us around, see what happens. Perhaps get a shot of an assault rifle, you know? And then drive down from there to Northfield Mountain, where they welcome you with open arms. And I've been down there, you know, and they have a little museum that they'll show you how the place works, and the whole production facility is underground. Mm-hmm. And at the time it was built, it was the biggest turbines in the world. It isn't anymore. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, there's another facility like it, which is about 3 times as big, that was put in West Virginia in order to supply power for Washington, D.C. But this is, you know, people are saying, oh, what are we going to do about energy storage with solar and wind being intermittent or variable? This is one very important way of doing energy storage, but there's a bunch of others. It's unbelievable.
They're coming up with all sorts of crazy things. I mean, buildings the size of apartment houses that are full of batteries, or in effect, the whole building's a battery.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you can have a grid in which The grid is intelligent, and the car. The car
cars,
on the grid
the
has
cars
the cars
can
that
be the
Can
batteries.
be the batteries. That's right. We're getting into a time that is mind-boggling, and the prospects that we have for doing things in the future are mind-boggling.
Over in New York, near North Adams, Mass, there's a flywheel.
Yes.
It's a commercial industrial flywheel storage device. It's owned by a power company.
Do you happen to know how that's what is it underground?
It's in a building.
It's in a building.
I don't know any more than that.
I hear that and I say to myself, what would happen if that came apart?
I think
Oh,
they've
dear.
considered that.
I'm sure they did. They probably considered it.
But the point
good
of it
and
is
hard.
that there's a lot of very bright people out there trying to figure out how to store power.
Oh,
And
yes.
some of them are coming up
And
with some
some
very
of them are
workable
coming
ideas.
up with some good stuff, and it's absolutely true. And they're coming up with more things than you can shake a stick at.
Yeah.
You know, more things than I can count off the top of my head. You know, I mean, we've got pumped storage, but they're talking about compressing air
Compressed air. That's
to the
another one.
point
Yep.
where the nitrogen in the air liquefies.
Liquefies. Yep.
And then they've got this nitrogen they can boil to drive a
Run
turbine.
a turbine, right.
They're talking about chemical storage of carbon dioxide coming out of, there's a news item. I'll get to that. Okay, next, on the 19th of November, the congressional, this is the news, actually, the dates I'm giving are actually probably in almost all cases, or all cases, the day after these things happen. But the Congressional Budget Office came up with a list of 103 ways to cut costs for the U.S. government. And what do you suppose the top item on the list was?
Stop giving the poor anything.
No. Carbon tax.
Carbon tax.
Carbon tax.
Well, that's getting very serious in Europe, too.
It is. $25 a ton. Now, I'll get into that in just a moment.
That sounds like a lot.
It sounds like a lot, but
It's not.
it actually is a lot. But the implications of it are immense. A $25 per ton emissions charge would cut the deficit by $1 trillion over a decade, $100 billion a year. According to the Budget Office, it's the top item of 103 on the list. Now, what they're charging here is per ton of carbon dioxide.
Which doesn't weigh very much.
No, carbon dioxide is heavier than carbon because each molecule has got 2 atoms of oxygen on it. The atomic weight of oxygen is 16. So you've got 32 plus the carbon, which is 12. So out of 44 atomic units, only 12 of them are the carbon, which means that a ton of carbon dioxide would come from a third of a ton, roughly, of coal. So this would be like $75 a ton on coal. It means a gallon of gasoline, which weighs about 7 pounds or 6.75 pounds or something, produces 20 pounds of carbon dioxide. 1 gallon because it's acquiring all that oxygen, and that's in the carbon dioxide. So a gallon of gasoline produces 20 pounds, so 100 gallons of gasoline will produce 1 ton. So you would have to add 25 cents a gallon to the price of gasoline if we did this.
It's hard for me to think about gases in terms of tons.
Yeah, I think it's hard for a lot of people. But nevertheless, there it is. And if you took that carbon dioxide and you compressed it, it would pretty easily liquefy. And then, of course, it's no longer a gas. It's a liquid, and you can get a pretty good idea of how heavy it is. But carbon dioxide is so heavy compared to atmospheric oxygen that if you have a container and you drop a little block of dry ice in there, it's going to fill with carbon dioxide from the bottom. Of course, the dry ice is cold. The gas that it gives off is going to be cold, so for that reason it's going to be, more compressed, but it's going to fill that container from the bottom. And if you hold a match at the top of the container, when the carbon dioxide gets up to the top, it's going to put the match out. So you'll know that the container is full of carbon dioxide. Physics is so interesting. Anyway, next item, also on the 19th. Green energy is grassroots energy in Germany. And this is something we've said before. We're going to say it again, I have no doubt. People don't understand that the Energiewende is driven to a very large degree by individual people, homeowners, farms, putting up renewable power, solar power on their roofs, biodigesters on farms, wind power in co-ops, and 50% of the power in Germany, the renewable power in Germany, belongs to individuals and small, in either as individuals or as groups of people. And the effect of this is that I don't know what percentage of the German population is directly involved in the production of power, but they've got 1.3 million power producers in Germany now, and almost 100% of those are small power producers. The very few who are big power producers, of course, are producing most of the power. But what's happening is the Energiewende is gobbling up the energy market in Germany, and it's just producing havoc to the utilities. They are having to take a good hard look at how they're going to survive when they've got competition from individual people.
Well, the same thing will be happening here.
Oh, yeah.
For really the same reasons, because the energy grid that we all grew up with was designed 100 years ago. And
well,
things
yeah.
have changed. It was designed by financiers.
Yes.
J.P. Morgan.
Yes.
George Westinghouse.
Yes. People who were interested in their own.
Their model, and it worked for many years, was very large generating stations separated by many miles with transmission lines connecting them.
And from the point of view of the costs and the efficiencies of scale, they could argue that that made sense.
It made sense.
Today, with efficiencies of scale, the least expensive power we've got available to us is getting to be wind. And solar is dropping below the price of coal and nuclear. And natural gas, well, natural gas is profiting from a fracking binge, which I have a feeling is going to end within a very few years.
10 years from now, to be talking about the bubble.
I think it'll be less than 10 years, to tell you the truth. Anyway, going on. The 20th of November, nuclear energy won a victory in federal court. Remember, we talked about an earlier victory. When the Federal Appeals Court said the United States government may no longer collect money from the nuclear power industry to finance a spent fuel repository. So we don't have any money left for the Yucca Mountain thing. And I think what's going to happen is this is going to, I mean, we're seeing a very large object slamming into an immovable thing here. This is the problem that we've got with nuclear waste is not getting settled. It's just getting settled in court. And the court settlement says this is what you have to pay, but it doesn't say anything about where the waste is going to be stored. And one of these days, by the way, I'm going to have Steve Rucroft, who is a friend of mine who works at CERN, in here to explain the ways that we can ultimately possibly get rid of nuclear waste by consuming it and having it produce power, but also leave us with no waste products that are long-term.
Why I was laughing is I facetiously say in my head, they got to figure out a way for us to eat it.
Yeah, well, actually, there was a guy, I think, in the Oregon legislature who got his 15 minutes of fame by suggesting that the easiest way to take care of the nuclear waste would be to put it in airplanes and sprinkle it evenly across the whole globe.
That makes sense.
Yeah. It would also take care of the population problem, but, you know, what can we say? Anyway, they have won that victory. The U.S. government is not allowed to finance the nuclear waste repository, and it has to pay money to the people who created the waste, which is kind of a bad deal. But, moving on, social media strategies, now we're back to fracking again, have won a decisive victory, apparently, when voters in 3 Colorado communities and 1 in Ohio approved anti-fracking ballot initiatives in early November. The pro-fracking people spent $900,000 on pro-fracking advertising, as opposed to $26,000 spent on anti-fracking campaigning, and they lost. And in Boulder, Colorado, they lost by, I think the vote against fracking was 73%, as I recall. This is a big loss.
Yeah.
But I think that, it's going to be interesting to see what comes of that. I happen to think fracking is probably an extremely bad idea. And everything that I've read about it indicates that from a scientific, ecological point of view, it is a bad idea. But I'm still kind of not 100% convinced on it, because there have been, the industry is largely unregulated. And I have read that if a fracking well is put in with sufficient care, it doesn't have to be all bad. But I'm not so sure about that. I think the position that I'm taking is like most of my positions. I could be talked into something else if somebody really had good arguments. Okay, now this is one of the most important items of the week. The president of the Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, the organization that owns Fukushima Daiichi, said this last week that the lessons they learned from the 2011 meltdowns, plus the spent fuel pool problems that caused an explosion in one other building, and then the subsequent cleanup costs and the problems with that, should serve as a warning to the world that nuclear energy is not fully safe. This is the president of TEPCO talking. Nuclear energy is not fully safe. That's an interesting admission.
Absolutely. Coming from its source.
Yeah. But we can move on from there. A couple of items today. New research, this was released I guess yesterday, says that there were errors in earlier measurements of global warming temperatures. And they indicate that global warming, the earlier measurements indicated that global warming had slowed and possibly reached a plateau. But the problem was that there was bad data from Africa and other parts of the world. And when they did satellite studies of these parts of the world where the data was a little more iffy, they discovered that the data was iffy because it was wrong. And when they built a new set of projections based on that data, they found that, in fact, it hasn't reached a plateau. It's just going its merry way. And it is continuing. However, here's another interesting pair of things to have come together. Researchers from Ben Gurion University in the Negev, this of course is in Israel, have developed a process to convert carbon dioxide and hydrogen into a renewable alternative for crude oil. And from my point of view, the most interesting thing about this is that it appeared in the news, not that they said that. It would be interesting to know more about what they were talking about, because the process that they're talking about can be done by the Sabatier process. And that was, the Sabatier process was discovered 100 years ago. I think it was 100 years ago this year. It was a process that won Paul Sabatier his Nobel Prize. But these guys are doing it a different way, and it would be interesting to know how it's different. They're doing it using carbon nanotechnology.
I read something about that, and I'm still lost. I mean, all I know about nanotechnology is it involves things that are very, very small.
Well, not necessarily very small. It involves things that are very small, but you put enough of them together and they get big.
But this goes against what I think I learned in thermodynamics. They're taking carbon dioxide and water, soda water in effect, and turning it into diesel fuel. If it's true, if it's happening, it's wonderful.
Yeah, but it's not energy negative. It's not energy zero. It takes power.
It's certainly going to take power.
I've got to learn how to stop this thing.
It's certainly going to take power. I can't figure out how they're doing it.
Well, I can tell you how the Sabatier process works.
Good.
Okay. Basically, what happens with the Sabatier process is you have hydrogen and you have carbon dioxide. Now, we should look at the sources of these two things. The hydrogen can be produced, for example, by electricity from wind or solar. Just any electricity will do it. But you produce the hydrogen using electricity from wind or solar. Hydrogen has some very interesting properties, but among the properties is a problem, which is that the hydrogen molecule, H2, is so small that it will go right through things.
You can't store it.
It'll go through things like steel. It doesn't go through steel very fast, but it does it. And the time that it takes to get through that steel is not all that long, but it's in terms of weeks. You know, what percentage of it are you going to lose per week, not what percentage per minute or something like that. So on a short term, you can store it. Carbon dioxide is the product that we're putting into the atmosphere that causes so much trouble. And we can capture that at a fairly low cost from a power plant. A natural gas plant or a coal burning plant would be two examples. And I should mention, I saw the prices of capture of carbon dioxide. And I'm not sure that this is actually correct, but it could be, and if it is, it's an eye-opener. The cost of capturing a ton of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, your best way to do it is probably to plant trees or something, because the plants are much more efficient than whatever chemical processes we've got. But a chemical process would be, or a physical process would be about $800 a ton. This is the $25 per ton tax. All right, taking it out of the water is much easier, and you can do that for a couple $100s a ton. But if you capture it from the stack gases at the plant, it costs about $7.50 a ton. Okay? So when it's rich, it's easy to capture. Now, if you produce your hydrogen when the price of electricity is low, which means probably at night, you might actually make money just making hydrogen because the price of power goes negative at night in many places. And you capture the CO2 from the power plant that produces it. Now you've got hydrogen and carbon dioxide. The hydrogen can be produced any time. The computer says, oh, we've got an excess supply of power on the grid. Let's make hydrogen. You can just make hydrogen. Okay? It's not like, you know, oh, maybe we should start our coal burning plant because we expect the demand to be high the day after tomorrow. We can go straight to making the hydrogen, and I believe you could go to it so fast that it would be much faster than the switchover that they do at Northfield Mountain, which is 15 minutes.
Which is fast.
It's fast. But anyway, if you know that you've got a window of opportunity in which you're going to be having a power supply that's very cheap or zero, because it happens, you can say, okay, now we're going to heat up the equipment and we're going to produce, you turn the pumps on, and we're going to take the hydrogen and the carbon dioxide and mix them with a catalyst. under pressure with heat. Now, obviously, what's happening is this is endothermic reaction. I mean, from the point of view of the fact that you have to put energy into this to get it to happen, this is not in any violation of the laws of thermodynamics. You're putting power into the carbon dioxide and the hydrogen. How much power? Well, the laws of thermodynamics will tell us that it's going to be more power than you got out of them.
Yeah.
Okay, but that doesn't necessarily have to be bad. What you have to do is you have to do this in a way which is not physically efficient. It has to be financially efficient, you see. And so if you can produce hydrogen at a negative cost, and you can capture the carbon dioxide really cheaply, and then cheaply or at a negative cost combine them to make methane, because that's what you get out of them. Now you've got something that you can sell to the natural gas plant when the price of power has gone high again. And it, unlike the hydrogen, can be stored for a long period of time. And it has other uses. You can use it to make plastic. You can use it to make gasoline. Yeah. You can use it to make all kinds of things. So, you know.
It's just another form of energy storage.
It's another form of energy storage, but one of the things that's absolutely beautiful about about carbon, is that if you've got a carbon molecule, you can turn it into some other carbon molecule. It's just a matter of how do you get there. It's not like other, carbon is far more easy to work with in terms of going from one place to another. So if you have carbon dioxide, you can go to methane. You can go to, I mean, really, some bright guy could figure out how to make aspirin out of carbon dioxide. I have no doubt. Absolutely no doubt.
I wouldn't bet against it.
I was surprised. Somebody pointed out to me that there was a path for making C4, which is a plastic explosive, that people occasionally, terrorists occasionally make C4 out of aspirin.
Wow.
Okay. Now, I actually tracked through that. I was interested in seeing how that was done, and I realized that if you're a terrorist and you want to make a bomb, this is not a good route. Because you're far more likely to kill yourself than anybody else. And of course, I would strongly recommend that if you're a terrorist, you think about some other form of employment, because it's not going to be satisfactory. Okay. Anyway, that was that. And now we've got one more news item here, which is DuPont has got a cellulosic biorefinery in construction in a place called Nevada, Iowa. That is not the state of Nevada and the state of Iowa. It's a town in Iowa. And they're saying they're going to take agricultural waste from neighboring farms, and they're going to use that agricultural waste to make 30 million gallons of renewable fuel per year. And I don't know what form that's going to take. The thing that we were talking about last week, when we were talking about, I think it was last week, might have been the week before, when we were talking about butanol.
Yeah.
They could go to butanol. They could go to ethanol. I think butanol is more attractive, especially considering that you can get there in a way that's carbon negative.
You convinced me of that last week.
Yeah, but the people who developed the way of making butanol have said that you can build an ethanol plant and convert it to a butanol plant, but they could make this into a variety of other things too. They could make diesel oil, and again, you know, crude oil is a source material for many, many, many different things, including not just diesel oil and gasoline and propane. When we had the gas crisis in the early 1970s, I was working in the chemical industry, and I was surprised, and should not have been, that one of the things that suddenly went into short supply was acetic acid. And I had always assumed that acetic acid had been manufactured as a product of ethanol. But, it, you know, and that's how acetic acid is one of the things that...
It's vinegar.
Yeah. I mean, you smell it and you say, gee, that smells like vinegar. Why? Well, it is not actually vinegar. It's just the major component of vinegar that makes it sour and smell the way it does. But yeah, and you could make a vinegar substitute out of it, I suppose, if it was of sufficient purity. But I had just assumed that it was made from alcohol.
Yeah, I would have figured that too.
But it wasn't. It was made from crude oil. And again, aspirin from crude oil, you can bet they're doing that. You know, I mean, it's like when they talk about synthesizing vitamins, why would you synthesize a vitamin? You can get it from nature.
Because it's cheaper.
It's cheaper to get it from something that's...
Yeah.
You know, there's a word that we need in the English language we don't have. It would be subnatural, as opposed to supernatural or natural.
I'll have to chew on that one. That sounds like it's worth thinking about.
Yeah, I think we're out of time.
Kind of looks like it.
Okay. I hope everyone has a good week, and we will be back next week.